Limbo is a puzzle platformer from Playdead. It's a game in which you play as a little boy who's struggling through a hostile land in search of, supposedly, his sister. It's a game that is as much about witnessing the world that has been created as it is about the plight of the player-controlled character. In recent years, we've had titles like Ori and the Blind Forest, which enter the same category of puzzle platformer, but Limbo, by comparison, is much smaller, and it's more about the puzzle than it is about the platforming. There's not a great deal of challenge to Limbo as far as controlling and platforming goes. You'll have to think your way through a variety of puzzles that are very well thought out and use a surprisingly few amount of pieces. But very few of those puzzles will test your reflexes. Most are satisfied by testing your wits, although many of them take place in timed scenarios. Platforming does step up in the last third of the game, but Limbo is a game that plods more than it sprints, because Limbo is about occupying a space in a world. You play as a child, and you feel accurately weak as that child. Your character has a bit of clunk to the way he moves, and while he is very capable, he does not always perform the actions you want at the speed you want or jump the distance that you would like him to. For the duration of the game, you're very fragile. There's no health system in this game. You're either alive or you're dead, and you cannot swim. The game manages to make you feel like a helpless child without that feeling unfair, because those are the rules for the entire game. And death is typically something that you can see coming, but it's not something that you can necessarily easily avoid, or it's something that you have to think your way through. You feel weak in a crazy world, a world in which you are literally not always in control, leading to some very intelligent sequences where you fight control over your own character, with worms that want to drown your poor boy. These sequences not only make you feel occasionally helpless, but also tour you through locations and force you into tight spots. The world is monochrome, it's dark, and it's savage. Not to mention beautiful, even if it is a little bit sparse. The backgrounds in the game are beautifully put together, adding an atmosphere to the game, allowing what's in the foreground to be largely about gameplay and puzzle-relevant materials. There's not a great deal of things to look at in this game, and it makes sense because they've set Limbo in a sparse environment, with only brief reminders of the danger that surrounds you and the despair that accompanies the brutality of this environment. In a recent review of Botnicula I put together, I critiqued the game for having a world that was spastic at points. Limbo is a great example of how to smoothly transition between environments. Throughout the game, you begin in a forest setting, you travel through a city, and end up in a factory. The transitions are subtle, and the subtlety of these transitions allow for these shifts in location to be palatable, even though particularly the shift from the forest to the city is very dramatic. I hardly find myself questioning how it is I managed to get from setting to setting things that should not be as close as they are because the game is paced so well, and each transition feels earned. I feel as though I've traveled a great distance, even though, I've only gone maybe two or three screens since I was last in the forest. Even when the game starts to deal with adventure-grade quality and possibilities, the game takes the time to ease you into them so they don't feel quite so strange. My limited gripes about the game are that there's no settings in the game, so be warned, this game runs only one way, and that's full screen with a butt-ton of film grain. I do want to know what this game looks like without the film grain, where it just looks crisp, and I also wish that I could run this game in full screen window, but this is just what you get from an independent studio's first game. Also, Limbo ends very abruptly, and even if the last scene in the game leaves a very lasting impression, it is thrown upon the player out of nowhere. The game's length is fine, but with such unpredictability for a first-time player, I found the ending just appearing out of nowhere to be very jarring. I play this game every single year, so think of this as less of a review and more of a love letter. But Limbo is a game that still invokes a reaction from me. I feel sad at the scenes of hopelessness, the spider weirds me out, and I'm still shocked by the brutality of the deaths in this game. There's something to the timing here that clicks with me in a way that games rarely ever do. I imagine that this game would take maybe 5 hours to complete on a first run through, though playing through this game to record the video for this review, it only took me 1 hour and 40 because I remembered all but 3 of the set pieces. Limbo is an absolute gem of a game. It's one of the few games that I return to over and over again, and I'm still not bored of. It's a game that I cannot recommend highly enough.